explains a lot of things. It explains where the pianoforte came from, and so Frank was obviously lying about all his suspicions there. He was almost definitely the one who gave it to Jane. This explains Jane's secrecy about the letters and getting the mail. Um, and this, this is, yeah, they kind of dumped on Frank here, and they're right because in a way he behaved very caddishly, not like a gentleman at all. Because he was trying to hide the secret. He was trying to hide the secret that he was engaged to Jane, that he had asked her to marry him, and part of hiding this was he was flirting with Emma, which, as Emma was like, I can't understand how she could put up with that. And that may have led to some of the confusion and disagreements between them. And if Jane was convinced that Frank was just leading her on, taking the job, doing the governess work was the logical thing for her to do. Because it's like, okay, Frank's leading me on, this isn't going to lead anywhere, I've got my life to live, I can't just wait for something that isn't going to happen. And in a way that kind of forced his hand. His mom dying allowed his hand to be forced because, or sorry, his aunt dying allowed his hand to be forced because she would never allow it. um his uncle, who he lived with, was just kind of henpecked and wouldn't have allowed it because the aunt didn't allow it, and because the aunt didn't allow it, he wouldn't allow it. But once the aunt passed, the uncle was like, okay, yeah, sure, marry whoever you want. And so he did his best to cover his tracks, and he probably covered them a little bit too well. um he probably could have, I don't know, it probably would have been more honorable to play more disinterested, not flirt at all with Emma and just sort of be like, oh yes, I'm a party boy, I like parties, I like dancing, and dance with Emma, dance with Harriet, dance with Jane, dance with all the single ladies, maybe Mrs. Weston, his mother and his stepmom. But he could have played it better, and he didn't. But as I said, this explains a whole bunch of things. And this really has this sort of feeling of a comedy of errors where you have this couple who are engaged, but the family doesn't like it. And I mean, this is just like the perfect Hallmark movie. But the thing is that it almost all happens off stage. Um, so this is a great side story where it's like you could go and investigate. You could build up a whole story around their engagement, their lives, and her writing letters saying, "Oh, I'm so disappointed with how you behaved with Emma," and him saying, "But darling, I needed to." And I mean, this is just like the perfect movie. And maybe somebody's attempted it. There is somewhat of a tradition of making stories around the side stories. So you have the famous main story of Hamlet, and you have, everybody knows Hamlet. Hamlet's father died or was killed by his uncle, and then the uncle marries Hamlet's mom, and then Hamlet goes and gets revenge, and everybody dies. And this is just like the Lion King, because they stole the Lion King from Hamlet. And but there was a play that was written called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And this takes place in the background of Hamlet, because Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are just these two minor characters who end up being killed. And so that hence the title, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And it's this whole big philosophical piece. But the thing is that it takes place in the middle of Hamlet. So you have little scenes of them where they interact with Hamlet and the other characters in Hamlet, just like happens in the play Hamlet. And they go off and do other stuff. And this whole Frank and Jane thing really could make its own standalone story where, you have Jane meeting Frank at this party, and because they were hanging out before they came to live nearby Emma. They came to live in the town. They knew each other from London. They knew each other from all over the place. And, they hung out in the same sort of circles. And so, here you have this thing where they're perfectly matched. And then you have these opportunities for confusion of the relationship. And then they both show up in the same town. And that may have been a coincidence that brought them together in the beginning. It's like, oh, you're from... Yes, I'm from. And so, as I said, this could be a really great story that, someone should write. Even update it to the modern time. And then you could almost have like this little hat tip of, making the alternate love interest, because, that's one of the things that the Hallmark movies all do. All of these rom-coms do, is like you have the love interest, you have the male love interest and the female love interest, and the male is also chasing this secondary female. And usually the secondary female is portrayed as just not good at all, or this obvious inferior to the main love interest, often mean or spiteful or whatever. But if you were to have this, if you were to do the plot this way, where the secondary love interest, Emma, is obviously the main character, or is obviously a main character. I don't know. This could be a good Hallmark movie, but I don't write those things. Maybe I should. I don't know.